I'm Gentleman Josh Hill. Tune into the Don't Tap podcast.
That's for you. I know that you made your first walk. You've done that now already. But prior to that, I mean, you've been a coach at Team Alpha Male for a long time, and you made many walks. You've sort of seen it. You've been around it. Talk to me about that mental preparation and the importance of what you've got to experience ahead of time. Your mental preparation a week into the fight, and then also even like leading into like those moments before you step in the cage.
So break mental preparation down into like maybe three different categories, and one would be like the specific mental training. I have like a mental coach that I work with. I've been working with him for 10 years now, Danny Patterson at Full Potential Health and Wellness. He's been my mental coach 10 years deep. He's a brown belt in jiu-jitsu, so he understands the game, but he works with all sorts of athletes and people that compete in high pressure situations. So we've been working on, obviously we've been doing things specifically for this fight, but we've been working together for 10 years. So I feel very confident in the mental game going into this. So he'll have different exercises for me to do, different tools that I use for, different periods to help prep me, whatever it is. So we have that. We have just the martial arts experience, like believing in what I actually bring to the table, which isn't really an issue. I really believe in the game that I bring to the table. Like, I think I'm a very high level, well-rounded martial artist. So going into fights, I'm very confident with the skills that I bring. Like, pretty much always, I'm like, I'd rather be me going into this thing than the other guy. You could always get nervous being like, oh shit, this, what could happen? There's pressure, there's this, there's that. But if you break it down to like, which guy would you rather be going into this? Would you rather be me or would I rather be him? I'm like, well, I'd rather be me going into this. And that's true for this fight as well. And then the final one, as you mentioned, would be the experience that I've had going to the cage, whether it be as a fighter, so my personal fight experience or my coaching experience, right? So as you mentioned, I coached down at Alpha Male for a few years. I've not only cornered multiple times in the UFC, probably about low 20s, probably about 18 to 22 times. I don't know exactly.
That's insane.
But that's just for the UFC, right? Like I've cornered hundreds of fighters. But not only have I cornered those 18 to 20 times in the UFC, somewhere in there, but in this actual building, the Apex, I've cornered, I don't know how many times, probably like,
so it almost feels like home.
Yeah. I'm comfortable there, right? Like obviously, Yohan and I both fought on Contender Series, so we've both already competed in this building. But last time I was there, I felt really comfortable. Like even something as simple as like when they brought us out to do the media stuff for Contender Series, we were in a group of 5, and it wasn't the guy that I was fighting against wasn't there. It was just like random 5 people, and the other 4 fighters were like taking pictures and like, oh my God, this is we're at the Apex. Like, take a picture of me beside the belt. Oh, somebody walks by. Oh, can I get a picture? Can I get a picture? And then like we're all sitting on the couch, and like a few people walk by. They're like, oh, Mike, how you been? Like, who are you here with? I'm like, oh no, it's actually for me this time. I'm like, oh shit, I didn't know you were fighting. I'm like, yeah, I wasn't. I just got back into it. So it was just like, I'm comfortable in that room. Like I'm comfortable with Fight Week. I know what to expect. Like while I've only done a Contender Series and one debut, I've also cornered a lot of times in the UFC, so I know what to expect when we get there Fight Week. I know what I've stayed in this hotel before. I've stayed at the New York for fights when cornering Cody Garbrandt for a fight. I think when he fought Pedro Munoz, we stayed at that hotel, and I think I've stayed another time. But so I know the hotel, I know the Whole Foods we're going to be shuttled to. I know the PI and
the tension, the visuals, the smell, like everything.
So yeah, like I it's not going to be overwhelming at all. Like it's going to feel just like it's funny, man. Going to the UFC fights kind of feels like a kid going back to camp. It's like, oh, you haven't seen these guys since the last time you're here, and everybody's like so happy to see everyone. Like it's pretty cool experience.
What a very nice Canadian perspective on going into bringing the violence that you were going to bring into the cage.
Yeah,
speaking of violence, I'll speak about your coach. I always talk about him being a beautiful master of violence and strategist, Kru Alin. Possibly one of the most vocal coaches. I've watched tape and you just hear him, man. He makes sure he drowns out everybody else around. Speak about that. Like with him being in your corner, if you watch the last fight against Mickey Gall, you hear him basically about 10 seconds before you drop what you drop, he goes, 2 punches, Mikey, and bang, bang. And then you just land those 2 big shots. It couldn't be any more perfect. Some people might not get it because they might not know who Kru Alin is, not being Canadian bound or even Stony Creek bound, but he has cornered so many fighters and possibly is one of the better coaches out there. So for you, speak to, you know, his level of coaching. And then also, I always like to hear the mental process inside the cage, how much you actually hear your coach, how much you're letting in, and how much you're focusing on just the fight there. And speak on that.
So for Kru Alin, I first saw Kru Alin on the native reservation Oshwegan in Ontario at fights because fights weren't legal in Ontario, right? This was back in, I think it was in like grade 11, so it's probably 2007, right? So MMA was illegal in Ontario at the time, so I was seeing his guys fight on the native reservation. His guys were absolutely destroying their opponents, and I ended up just getting a construction job down the street from his gym, and looked up MMA gyms that it was close to, and saw that his gym was there. So I ended up going over every night after work, and we kind of, after the first basically month, we hit it off where I went in and got my ass kicked by Shane Campbell. I got my ass kicked by all these other like pro Muay Thai fighters and pro kickboxers and pro MMA.
Romero.
Yeah, kept coming back in, and he's like, "Oh man, you're really still coming back after the beating you've taken." I was like 17, right? And I was like, "Yeah, man, I want to be a fighter." He's like, "Okay, cool." Like after that, he never, charged me to go to the gym. He always like welcomed me in and stuff. So I've been working with him on and off when I'm home. I was, living in California for 7 years, and Halifax for 5 before that. So I've been training with Alin for about 13 years. 13 years. So we have a lot of experience together. So like you mentioned, he's a world-class coach. He's coached Glory World Champions, Bellator Kickboxing World Champions, Muay Thai World Champions, UFC fighters. Like, he's coached everybody, right? He's a cut man for the UFC. So again, you talk about that experience, the invaluable experience that he brings to the table. But with that, he's like also very understanding. Like, it's not just like, this is the way it has to be done, this is the way we're going to do things. He's like very understanding. He takes my opinions into consideration, and we might modify things for me, or I have like things like, well, maybe we could do this, and he's like, sometimes he's like, no, we're gonna still do it this way, or he's like, okay, well, let me take that in consideration. And so it's cool. It's like he's a very good coach in the way of like, he knows exactly how things need to be done, but he's not like, he allows you to have like your own flair, right? Like, he's not trying to change me from my fighting style into like, no, you need to fight like this other guy. It's like, we embrace what makes me different, but we do the things that are important the way that he wants to.
Yeah, every fighter's got to be different. I mean, instinctually, there's one thing that you have instinctually in your back pocket, which is that guillotine. Whether that was already naturally there, some people naturally have that, or if it's a team alpha male thing that you drilled. Like, there's little nuances to fighters and little things that I would imagine that you have to juggle and really cultivate. If you don't, they're going to fight against you. You're going to eventually battle against a coach if you're not really able to do what you want to do. So,
right.
Now in the cage, when you're in there, and is it more tunnel vision? You're focused on what you guys mentally prepared, and you don't really hear too much, or do you actually hear a lot of what he says? I mean, is it just coincidence that was give me 2 punches, Mikey, or was it just boom, he says it, you wait 10 seconds, it lines up, Mickey comes in and bang, bang?
I hear some of what my coaches say when I'm competing, but not necessarily everything. So we've actually worked on some things to help with this fight. So I'm not going to say what they are because I'd like to keep them within our circle.
Of course.
So I don't think that will be an issue at all. I don't remember. There's so much hype around that moment. I don't remember if I heard him say that or not.
It could just be one of those things, man. You guys drill so much. Like, I watch, being able to see House of Champions, and then seeing Kru Alin's Instagram feed and your Instagram feed is just nonstop drill, breaking belly pads.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys don't mess around. All of you guys down at that camp. So it's just good to see Canadian contingent. There's Niagara top team. There's House of Champions. We just have a great group of Canadian fighters coming up. So it's pretty awesome to see it. Bellator and UFC.
Yeah.
So You look ahead, you have a fighter in, a fellow Canadian. It sort of sucks to see two Canadians come up on the rise and have to sort of, I made a joke about cannibalizing each other in the situation, but the reality is two guys are going to step in the cage, one guy's going to step out the victor. I've sort of already placed my pick on this one. It's not, and I always get in shit for being a homer and running, and literally homer, you're down the street as far as where you train from where I live. But the idea is you have more tools as far as what I see, not to see, I'm coming from a fan standpoint. You have the grappling, you have the cleaner striking, you have the power. He possesses the power. You also possess the athletics as well too. And with Yohan coming into this fight, his power's there early, but we've seen that cardio sort of drop off a cliff, right? And I'm sure it's something that he's working on. It comes maybe from throwing so much into his punches or whatever it is. For you, strategy-wise, I know that I think that you have the clear advantage on the feet. But the reality of taking him down and grinding him out a little bit as well, too, is that something that you're willing to do if you need to?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's MMA, right? I think I appreciate what you said, but I without sounding too full of myself, of course I agree. Like, I think I'm better than him everywhere. I think his most dangerous attributes are, like you said, he's powerful. I'd imagine he'll be very strong, especially early. So I'm not expecting to go out there and I think I'll still definitely be able to take him down whenever I want to. I think I'll be able to grapple him whenever I want to. But I expect heavy hips. I expect strong underhooks. I expect him trying to cover my head. So I've prepared for that. So I'm not worried if he's strong early. I'm not worried about the power early. I just need to respect it and not, be arrogant. But that's not really my style. Like, I think I'm a pretty clean fighter. I think I'm a pretty technical fighter. He, I think, will be much more willing to engage in a brawl. I think he can be A, drawn into a brawl or drawn into making mistakes, and B, I think he might try to push for that because I'm sure he knows I'm a technical fighter. So we've prepared for that as well. Yeah, I think there's going to be, I think the biggest gap in our skills will probably be the jiu-jitsu, the grappling on the ground. I think followed by the wrestling, followed by striking. I think all of those are in my favor. I think physical conditioning will definitely be in my favor. I'm in the best shape of my life. I know everybody says that. It's pretty cliche, but I really am like the most prepared I've ever been. My physical conditioning right now, it's giving me a lot of confidence. Like that this is by far the most conditioned I've ever been, and by far the most efficient I've ever been. Like I've been doing a lot more sparring and grappling rounds live than I have in the past. And it's just giving me that confidence to really push, like not only the confidence to push, but to know when to push, when to pull back, and when I decide to go, I'm able to like fully go. Like, okay, there's 9 minutes left. Like I still have 9 minutes in this, fight that we're doing in the gym. Like, okay, I have 9 minutes left. I know I can push super hard and there will still be gas left in the tank, or those lungs will fill back up. Like, I know I'll catch my second wind. I feel really confident in that right now. And I know that's probably something that's in the back of his head. Like you said, we've seen him gas a couple of times. So oddly enough, like I think the longer the fight goes, the better it is for me. Even though when you look at my record, I have 8 wins and all 8 are first round stoppages. 4 of them submissions, 4 of them knockouts. So like while my record might indicate the first round favors me, I think in reality, the longer the fight goes, the better it is for me. That's not to say I can't stop him in the first. I've stopped a lot of really tough guys in the first round. In fact, 2 of the last 3 guys I stopped were undefeated, right? I stopped them in combined less than a round. I think it was even less than half a round combined. It was like 39 seconds and like a minute 20 or a minute 40 or something like that. And those guys were both undefeated, 6-0 and 7-0.
The longer this fight goes, the line's going to be Mike Malott, because it's just he throws so much into his shots, and I don't know if you can retrain that. It's very evident in his shots, and that's part of like his mystique. But at the same time, once we're past that sort of minute and a half of him throwing a flurry, it starts to fall off a little bit. And then once you get into about 5-minute mark, it's like, man, going into the second round, it's very evident. So
I mean, yeah, you can like work on your cardio all you want, but if efficiency is the issue, there's only so much you can do with adding like, of course you want to improve your cardio, right? Like that's obviously important, but if your reaction when things are slightly uncomfortable is to slam your, pedal to the metal, that's how you respond to almost every situation when you're uncomfortable. You're going to gas out. You can only sprint for so long, and that seems to be how he responds under pressure. So I think that will favor me because I think I do a good job of staying calm in firefights, to stay calm when on top, on bottom, like even when, Mickey got a takedown in the last fight and I got up immediately, and like it wasn't difficult. It wasn't anything I had to like worry about, right? I know if I get taken down, I know I'll get on top or get back up or get a submission efficiently. I know if I get cracked, I know I'll find my way to a safe position efficiently. If I need to get on top, I know I'll get on top and I'll be the one pushing the pace, but he'll be trying to catch up, and it won't be favoring him.
And that actually sort of transitions into something that I've asked almost every fighter I've talked to. I find that fighters, not all sort of admit to the idea of fear, but the idea is your preparation comes in the fact of you trying to stay away from your biggest fearful moment in there, whatever that is. Some guys worry about having no cardio and being helpless in there. Some guys worry about just the mental preparation, just not quite being there and losing themselves in there, which you just spoke to, which is the exact opposite, right? If your mental preparation is there, it'll actually even help your cardio out. It'll help everything through the fight, all the way through the fight, and how you're measured and everything else. So just speak to that. Like, what is your biggest fear in the cage? And how do you work to keep yourself away from that, right? Your ego, protecting yourself away from that fear, and transition that into your training and your mental preparation as well too.
I'd say probably the biggest fears would be like almost everybody's biggest fear, right? Like three awful things that could happen. Say you get cracked, you get exhausted, or you get in a position you can't get out of, or you get taken down and you're in a position you can't get out of. Those are probably like three of the worst and most common things that could happen to somebody. So rather than like fear those, which a young arrogant version of me might be like, nobody's gonna crack me, I'm never gonna get hurt, nobody can take my back, nobody's gonna do this or that. It's like now I do the opposite, where I throw myself into those situations as often as possible. So number one with Kru Alin is focusing on the shield. Like you might see with his guys big power and knocking guys unconscious, but one thing he really emphasizes is defense and having a solid shield, and knowing like it's great to get a knockout, but he's like, we're going to make sure you're not eating brutal shots. Like that's one thing we spend a lot of time working on. And then when you go against a guy who's like a power puncher like that, this is perfect. I'm like, well, we've been working on this for years, but even more specifically the last year since I moved back to Canada, basically. The second one I mentioned is cardio. All right, well, how do you prepare yourself for being able to push hard for 15 minutes? Well, you up your cardio, right? So I've been working on my conditioning through conditioning specific things, but a lot of it is through getting a ton of rounds, right? Like you can be a triathlete all you want, but if you're not efficient when you start fighting, you're going to gas out. Like I've had, friends that were Ironmen come do this and they're like, holy shit, 2 minutes into wrestling, they're like, I want to throw up. I'm used to doing like 8 hours of intense cardio. I'm like, yeah, it's very different. So getting a ton of live rounds, especially heavy on the wrestling, and mixing up energy systems. And then, cardio and efficiency and experience for the fatigue. And then the final one would be like something like getting in a position that you can't escape from, right? Having somebody mount you or take your back or side control or something and just like beat the crap out of you. I've been putting myself in those situations a lot. I work with Andre Grambois for my jiu-jitsu, and he's, again, very heavy on defense, right? Escaping positions, being unpinnable, being unsubmittable, being somebody who can't be held down, right? So we work on that a lot. And then in Niagara, I work with Chris Prickett, who's a two-time Olympic alternate for Canada, world-class wrestling coach and athlete. Sorry, we froze for a sec. We're working on takedown defense, getting up off bottom, and then obviously a lot of takedown offense, right? So working both sides. I think if those are the three big concerns, right? Getting cracked, getting put in a position that you can't get out of, or gassing, I think I've addressed all three of those extremely well. And I think the way that you do that isn't by having some arrogant self-belief like, oh, it couldn't possibly happen to me. Like, that's great. It's great to have like self-belief in the, you know, the read the self-help books and you know, do this and that, all these Instagram solutions, right? That's all good and well, but it's like, what happens when those things happen, or how do you actually stop that stuff from happening? It's not just like arrogance and like, I have plans to make sure that stuff's not going to happen.
Who are some young fighters up and coming right now that you sort of want to highlight, or some guys you want to talk about?
The most obvious one and most relevant one would be Anthony Romero. He's a killer. He's so good, man. And like, he's a high level grappler. He's an intelligent striker. He's got ways to knock you out, like he showed in his last fight. He's super strong. He's in unbelievable shape. Very high MMA IQ. Like, there's no hole in this guy's game. He's really extremely high level. And I forget how young he is, just because I've known him for a while. But I think he's only like 24 or 25. Like, he's pretty young. So he's really good. Another really good up-and-comer out of Ontario, Vinny Diaz, is a killer. He's like a little Canadian Habib, just relentlessly looks for the takedown, gets on top of guys until he either drowns them or submits them, right? But right now, more of the MMA fighters are going to be from Niagara top team, right? That's where like the majority of high-level MMA fighters in this area are. Like, we all get together there and spar and wrestle. Like, it's a super high-level room. I've said I've trained at Alpha Male, I've trained at world-class rooms, and I don't feel like I'm missing out on anything being up in Canada. Like, I love living at home. I love being around my family. I love being around my girlfriend. I love having all these luxuries. But at the end of the day, if I thought the training were subpar, I wouldn't be living here. I'd go somewhere else. I have world-class coaches. I have world-class training partners. Obviously, I feel like Aaron Jeffrey isn't the guy that you can call an up-and-comer anymore. Like, he's ranked in Bellator. He's ranked top 5, or they might have dropped him a little bit.
Yeah, I don't get that, man. I don't understand that. He knocks the dude out, and then the only thing that unfortunately that man has done since then that he knocked out is maybe an Instagram, or sorry, an OnlyFans post, and he gets ranked above Aaron again. So I don't really know. It doesn't make too much sense to me. But anyway,
I don't know.
Speaking of some of your coaches and some of the guys, we have Andre Grembois as well. Just came in as well too. But I know, like I said, I didn't want to take up too much of your time. The way you broke that down, I wanted to pick your brain for a while now. Mindset is so important to me, as far as that symbiotic relationship between coaches, understanding, you know, that mental preparation, understanding your mental preparation personally, where you draw motivation from. It's interesting. It's so interesting to me because you guys really do go in there, and it is the highest level of sport, it's the highest level of risk, next to war. So, I mean, the idea of that mental preparation is very intriguing to me, and I know to a lot of the fans out there too. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate you giving somebody with a podcast that is a small but growing fan base an opportunity. So I appreciate, once again, your time, sir.
Thank you for having me on, man. Love what you're doing for local MMA. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you. Cheers.
I'm Rafian Stocks, Bellator champion, and tune into the Don't Tap podcast, because I'm about to beat the shit out this kid, bro.